a small town, a routine police stop spirals into a media firestorm when Officer Jake Carter wrongfully detains young Tyler, a 10-year-old black boy. As tensions rise and protests erupt, an unlikely friendship forms between the two, challenging preconceptions and igniting a movement for change. But dark forces threaten to unravel their progress, and a shocking conspiracy emerges that could destroy everything they've built. Will Jake and Tyler's bond survive the storm, or will the weight of systemic injustice prove too much to bear? And if you love your family and want to hear more incredible stories like this one, subscribe to our channel. Officer Jake Carter cruised through the familiar streets of his neighborhood, a sense of security and control washing over him. The quiet hum of the patrol car's engine and the gentle glow of streetlights created a false sense of tranquility. Jake had always felt at home here, knowing every corner and alley like the back of his hand. It was his turf, and he took pride in keeping it safe. The crackling of the police radio shattered the silence. Dispatch to Unit 17. We have reports of suspicious activity involving a group of juveniles near the corner of Elm and 5th. Please investigate. Jake's pulse quickened as he responded, 10-4, dispatch, Unit 17 en route. He flipped on his sirens and sped towards the location, his mind already racing with possibilities. In his experience, suspicious activity could mean anything from harmless mischief to something far more sinister. As he approached the scene, Jake spotted a group of young boys dispersing rapidly. His eyes locked onto one figure who seemed to match the description of a suspect from a recent robbery. Without hesitation, Jake leapt from his vehicle, his hand instinctively reaching for his weapon. "Police! Stop right there!" he shouted, his voice authoritative and harsh. The boy, Tyler, froze in his tracks, his eyes wide with fear. Jake approached swiftly, his movements aggressive and intimidating. He roughly grabbed Tyler's arm, spinning him around and forcing him against the patrol car. "Hands where I can see them! Don't move!" Jake barked, his training kicking in automatically. Tyler trembled beneath Jake's grip, his voice quivering as he tried to speak. "Officer, I didn't do anything wrong. Please, I was just walking home." Jake ignored the boy's pleas, focused solely on following protocol. He began to pat Tyler down, searching for any weapons or contraband. The scene was tense, the air thick with fear and misunderstanding. Unbeknownst to Jake, Lisa, Tyler's mother, had been watching the entire incident unfold from down the street. Her heart raced as she saw her son being manhandled by the officer. Without thinking, she broke into a run, her voice cutting through the night air. "Stop! That's my son! What are you doing?" Lisa screamed, her face contorted with a mixture of anger and terror. Jake's head snapped up at the sound of Lisa's voice. For a brief moment, doubt flickered across his face, but he quickly steeled himself. "Ma'am, stay back. This is an ongoing investigation." Lisa ignored his warning, closing the distance between them with determined strides. "He's just a child. Let him go." The commotion had drawn the attention of nearby residents, who began to emerge from their homes, cell phones in hand. The soft glow of screens illuminated the darkening street as people started recording the incident. Jake found himself caught in a rapidly escalating situation. He maintained his hold on Tyler, unsure of how to proceed. The boy's frightened whimpers and Lisa's impassioned pleas created a cacophony of distress that seemed to drown out all rational thought. As more people gathered, the atmosphere grew increasingly tense. Murmurs of disapproval rippled through the crowd, and Jake could feel the weight of dozens of accusing eyes upon him. In that moment, Jake made a decision that would change the course of his life and career. Instead of de-escalating the situation, he chose to assert his authority. With a swift motion, he pulled out his handcuffs and secured them around Tyler's wrists. "You're under arrest for resisting an officer and suspicious activity," Jake announced, his voice wavering slightly as he realized the gravity of his actions. Lisa's anguished cry pierced the night, as she watched her son being placed in the back of the patrol car. The crowd's murmurs turned to shouts of outrage, and the unmistakable sound of video uploads filled the air as Jake drove away from the scene, his heart pounding in his chest. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had just made a terrible mistake. Little did he know that this incident would soon explode across social media, igniting a firestorm of controversy and forcing him to confront his own biases and the systemic issues plaguing law enforcement. The events of that night would set in motion a chain reaction that would challenge everything Jake thought he knew about his job, his community, and himself. It was the beginning of a journey that would test his resolve, push him to his limits, and ultimately lead to an unexpected friendship that would change both his life and Tyler's forever. The incident involving Jake and Tyler spread like wildfire across social media platforms. Within hours, cell phone footage of the confrontation had been viewed millions of times, sparking outrage and reigniting debates about racial profiling and police brutality. The community, long simmering with tension over similar incidents, finally reached its boiling point. Lisa, devastated by what had happened to her son, but determined to make a change, emerged as a powerful voice for the community. She organized a meeting at her local church, inviting residents, community leaders, and even members of the police force to discuss the systemic racism that had plagued their town for far too long. The church basement was packed to capacity on the night of the meeting. The air was thick with emotion, anger, fear, and a desperate hope for change. Lisa stood at the front of the room, her voice steady despite the trembling of her hands. "What happened to my son could have happened to any of our children," she began. "We can't let this continue. We need to come together and demand change." As Lisa spoke, the crowd nodded in agreement, murmurs of support rippling through the room. She outlined a plan for peaceful protests, community outreach programs, and a push for policy reform within the police department. Meanwhile, across town, Jake sat alone in his apartment, the weight of his actions pressing down on him like a physical force. He stared at his phone, scrolling through the countless angry comments and calls for his badge. The viral video played on loop on his TV screen, forcing him to confront the reality of what he had done. As he watched himself manhandle Tyler, Jake felt a sickening twist in his gut. Had he really been that aggressive? That intimidating? He tried to reconcile the officer in the video with the image he had of himself, a protector, a guardian of the community. For the first time, Jake began to question his motivations and his ingrained beliefs. He thought back to his training, to the subtle and not-so-subtle messages about who was considered a threat. Had he been acting on unconscious biases all this time? With a heavy heart, Jake decided to attend the community meeting at the church. He slipped in quietly, taking a seat at the back, his presence unnoticed amidst the crowd. As the meeting progressed, various community members stood up to share their experiences with the police. A middle-aged woman recounted how her teenage son was repeatedly stopped and searched on his way home from school. An elderly man described the fear he felt every time he saw a police car in his rearview mirror. Each story hit Jake like a physical blow. He had never considered how his actions, and those of his fellow officers, might be perceived by the community he had sworn to protect. The weight of responsibility grew heavier with each passing minute. Then, a young girl stood up to speak. Her voice was quiet but firm, as she described how she used to dream of becoming a police officer, but now felt afraid every time she saw one. Jake felt a lump form in his throat as he realized the far-reaching consequences of the distrust between the police and the community. As the meeting drew to a close, Lisa made a final impassioned plea for unity and action. "We can't change the past," she said, her eyes scanning the room. "But we can work together to create a better future for our children." The crowd erupted in applause, but Jake remained silent, his mind racing. He realized that he had a choice to make. He could ignore what he had heard tonight, retreat back into the comfort of his familiar beliefs, Or he could take this opportunity to learn, to grow, and to be part of the change that was so desperately needed. As people began to file out of the church, Jake stood up, his decision made. He approached Lisa, his heart pounding. "Mrs. Johnson," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I'm Officer Carter. I want to apologize for what happened to your son, and I want to learn how to do better." Lisa turned to face him, surprise and a mix of other emotions flashing across her face. For a moment, the two stood in silence, the weight of their potential conversation hanging in the air between them. It was a small step, a tiny crack in the wall of mistrust that had been built over years of misunderstanding and fear. But it was a start. And as Jake and Lisa began to talk, the first seeds of change were planted, seeds that would grow into something neither of them could have imagined on that fateful night of the incident. In the weeks following the incident, Tyler found solace in an unexpected place: his art. What began as doodles to distract himself from the trauma of his encounter with Jake soon evolved into something much more significant. Tyler started working on a mural, a massive piece that would span the side of an abandoned building near his home. The mural was Tyler's way of processing his emotions and expressing his hopes for the future. With each brushstroke, he poured his fears, dreams, and vision for a more united community onto the wall. The vibrant colors and bold designs began to attract attention from passers-by, who would often stop to watch the young artist at work. One day, as Tyler was adding detail to a section depicting hands of different colors clasped together, he noticed a familiar figure watching from across the street. It was Jake, looking uncertain and out of place in his civilian clothes. Their eyes met, and for a moment, neither moved. Then, surprising both of them, Tyler called out, "Hey, Officer Carter, want to help?" Jake hesitated, visibly torn between the urge to retreat and the desire to make amends. Finally, he crossed the street, approaching Tyler cautiously. I'm not much of an artist," he admitted. Tyler shrugged, offering Jake a paintbrush. "Neither was I until I started. Come on, I'll show you what to do." Reluctantly, Jake took the brush and, under Tyler's guidance, began to add color to the mural. As they worked side by side, an awkward silence gave way to tentative conversation. Tyler explained the symbolism behind different elements of the mural, and Jake listened, truly hearing the young boy's perspective for the first time. "This part here," Tyler said, pointing to a section showing a diverse group of people standing together, "is what I hope our community can be like one day, where everyone feels safe and respected, no matter what they look like." Jake nodded, a lump forming in his throat. "That's a good dream to have, Tyler," he said softly. As days turned into weeks, Jake continued to return to the mural site, working alongside Tyler. The two formed an unlikely friendship, each learning from the other. Tyler shared stories of his experiences as a young black boy in their community, opening Jake's eyes to realities he had never fully understood before. In turn, Jake opened up about the pressures and fears he faced as a police officer, helping Tyler see beyond the uniform. The mural began to garner attention beyond just curious passers-by. Local news outlets picked up the story of the young artist and the police officer working together to create something beautiful. Social media buzzed with images and videos of their collaboration, sparking discussions about community policing and racial reconciliation. As the mural neared completion, it had become more than just a piece of art. It was a symbol of hope, a tangible representation of what could be achieved when people from different backgrounds came together with open hearts and minds. One afternoon, as Jake and Tyler stood back to admire their work, a small crowd gathered. Among them was Lisa, Tyler's mother, who had been watching the developing friendship between her son and the officer with a mixture of caution and hope. "It's beautiful," Lisa said, her voice filled with emotion. "Both the mural and what it represents." Jake turned to her, his eyes sincere. "Thank you for allowing me to be a part of this. It's taught me more than I could have imagined." As the crowd grew, People began to share their own stories and perspectives, inspired by the mural and the unlikely partnership that created it. The conversation flowed freely, touching on difficult topics like systemic racism, police reform, and community responsibility. Tyler's mural had become a catalyst for change, a safe space where difficult conversations could happen and understanding could grow. It wasn't solving all the problems overnight, but it was a start, a visual reminder of what was possible when people chose connection over division. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the mural, Jake looked at Tyler and Lisa. "This is just the beginning, isn't it?" he asked. Tyler nodded, a determined smile on his face. "Yeah, it is. We've got a lot more work to do." And with that, the trio turned back to the growing crowd, ready to continue the challenging but necessary work of bringing their community together. The mural stood behind them, a colorful testament to the power of art, understanding, and the unexpected friendships that can emerge from even the most difficult circumstances. As Jake's involvement with Tyler and the community grew, he found himself facing increasing scrutiny from his fellow officers. The police station, once a place of camaraderie and shared purpose, had become tense and divided. One morning, as Jake entered the locker room to prepare for his shift, he was met with cold stares and hushed whispers. Officer Mike Dawson, a veteran cop known for his hardline approach, approached Jake with a sneer. "Well, if it isn't Officer Kumbaya," Mike taunted. "Enjoying your little art project with the kid? Maybe you should turn in your badge and become a full-time babysitter." Jake felt his face flush with anger, but he kept his composure. "That kid has a name, Mike. It's Tyler. And yeah, I am enjoying working with him. Maybe you should try getting to know the community you're supposed to protect." Mike's face darkened. "Watch yourself, Carter. You're playing a dangerous game, cozying up to those people. They'll never accept you, no matter how many murals you paint." As Mike stormed off, Jake couldn't shake the feeling of isolation. He had always seen his fellow officers as a second family, but now he felt like an outsider. Later that day, as Jake was filling out paperwork at his desk, he felt a presence beside him. Looking up, he saw Sergeant Tom Reeves, a respected officer nearing retirement. "Got a minute, Jake?" Tom asked, his voice low. Jake nodded, following Tom to a quiet corner of the station. The older officer's face was etched with concern and something else, understanding. "I've been watching you, son," Tom began. "What you're doing out there with the community, it's not easy, but it's necessary." Jake felt a wave of relief wash over him. "Thanks, Sarge. Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing the right thing." Tom placed a hand on Jake's shoulder. "Let me tell you something. When I first joined the force, things were different. We didn't talk about community policing or racial bias. But over the years, I've seen the damage that kind of thinking can do. What you're doing, it's the future of policing." Jake listened intently as Tom shared stories from his long career, mistakes he'd made, lessons he'd learned, and the slow, difficult process of changing his own perspective. "It's not going to be easy," Tom warned. "You'll face resistance from both sides. But don't give up. The job isn't just about enforcing the law. It's about serving the community. All of the community." Emboldened by Tom's words, Jake decided to take his involvement a step further. He began attending community meetings regularly, not as a police officer, but as a concerned citizen wanting to learn and understand. At first, his presence was met with suspicion and hostility. Many community members saw his uniform as a symbol of oppression rather than protection. But Jake persevered, listening more than he spoke, absorbing the stories and experiences of people he had sworn to serve but had never truly understood. One evening, during a particularly heated meeting about police accountability, an elderly woman named Mrs. Johnson stood up to speak. Her voice quavered with emotion as she recounted how her grandson had been wrongfully arrested the trauma of the incident still fresh in her mind. As Jake listened, he felt a deep sense of shame and responsibility. He realized that for every Tyler, there were countless others who had suffered similar injustices. When Mrs. Johnson finished speaking, the room fell silent. Jake stood up, his heart pounding. "Mrs. Johnson," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "I can't undo what happened to your grandson, but I want you to know that I hear you. We, the police, have failed you and this community in many ways, and I'm committed to doing whatever it takes to change that." The room was silent for a moment, the tension palpable. Then slowly, Mrs. Johnson nodded, tears in her eyes. "Thank you, officer," she said softly. "It's a start." As Jake left the meeting that night, he felt a mix of exhaustion and hope. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but he was more certain than ever that it was the right path. With each story he heard, each perspective he gained, Jake was becoming not just a better police officer, but a better human being. He realized that true change wouldn't come from grand gestures or quick fixes, but from the slow, often painful process of listening, learning, and actively working to bridge the divide between the police and the community they served. And despite the challenges ahead, Jake was ready to face them, one conversation, one connection at a time. As the weeks passed, Tyler and Jake's friendship continued to grow, transcending the initial circumstances of their meeting. What had begun as a tentative collaboration on a mural had evolved into a genuine bond, with both of them learning from each other's perspectives and experiences. One sunny afternoon, as they sat on a park bench sharing ice cream cones, Tyler's face lit up with an idea. "Hey Jake, what if we did something big? Like, really big?" Jake raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What do you have in mind, kiddo?" Tyler's eyes sparkled with excitement. "What if we organized a huge community event? Something that could bring everyone together, the police, families, kids, everyone. We could have games, food, music, and maybe even a big art project that everyone could work on together." Jake considered the idea, a smile slowly spreading across his face. "You know what, Tyler? That's not half bad. In fact, it's pretty brilliant." Over the next few days, Jake and Tyler threw themselves into planning. They created flyers, reached out to local businesses for sponsorship, and started spreading the word through social media. Their enthusiasm was infectious, and soon others began to join in, offering help and ideas. However, not everyone was on board with the idea. When Jake presented the plan to his fellow officers, he was met with skepticism and resistance. "You want us to what?" Officer Mike Dawson scoffed. "Play games with the same people who've been protesting against us? No way." Jake tried to reason with him. "That's exactly why we need to do this, Mike. We need to show them we're not the enemy. We're part of this community too." Despite the pushback, Jake refused to give up. He found allies in unexpected places like Sergeant Tom Reeves, who threw his support behind the event. On the community side, Tyler faced his own challenges. Some of his friends and neighbors were hesitant about interacting with the police in a casual setting. "I don't know, Tyler," his friend Marcus said, shaking his head. "It feels weird to just pretend everything's okay after what happened to you." Tyler understood their concerns, but he was determined. "It's not about pretending everything's okay," he explained. "It's about taking the first step to make things better." As the day of the event drew closer, Jake and Tyler worked tirelessly to bring their vision to life. They coordinated with local artists to set up a community mural project, arranged for food trucks to provide refreshments, and organized a series of games and activities designed to foster interaction between police officers and community members. The night before the event, Lisa discovered Tyler still awake, putting finishing touches on a banner for the event. She watched him for a moment, a mix of pride and concern on her face. "Tyler," she said softly, "are you sure about all this? About trusting Jake?" Tyler looked up at his mother, his expression serious. "Mom, I know it's hard, but Jake's really trying, and if we want things to change, we have to be willing to give people a chance when they're trying to do better." Lisa nodded, pulling her son into a hug. "When did you get so wise, huh?" she said, her voice thick with emotion. The morning of the event arrived, bringing with it a sense of nervous excitement. Jake arrived early at the park, his stomach in knots. As he helped set up tables and hang banners, he couldn't help but wonder if anyone would actually show up. His fears were put to rest as people began to trickle in. Families with young children, teenagers, elderly couples. A diverse cross-section of the community began to fill the park. And then, to Jake's relief and surprise, he saw a group of his fellow officers arrive, some still looking uncertain, but willing to give it a try. Tyler rushed up to Jake, his face beaming. "It's really happening," he exclaimed. Jake grinned back, feeling a surge of hope. "Yeah, it really is." As the day progressed, the initial awkwardness began to fade. Children challenged police officers to games of basketball. Families worked side by side on the community mural, and conversations flowed over shared meals. Jake found himself in deep discussion with Mrs. Johnson, the woman who had shared her grandson's story at the community meeting. They talked about her concerns, her hopes for the community, and the changes she wanted to see in policing. "I can't promise we'll get everything right," Jake said honestly. "But I can promise we'll keep trying, keep listening, and keep working to do better." Mrs. Johnson nodded, a small smile on her face. "That's all we can ask for, officer. That's all we can ask for." As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the park, Jake and Tyler stood back, taking in the scene before them. People were laughing, talking, and connecting in ways they hadn't before. "We did it," Tyler said softly. Jake put his hand on Tyler's shoulder. "Nobody, we're just getting started." The event wasn't a magic solution to all the problems between the police and the community, but it was a start, a step towards understanding and healing. And as Jake looked around at the faces of his neighbors and colleagues, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was what being a police officer was truly about, not just enforcing laws, but building and being part of a community. The day of the big community event had finally arrived. The park was a hive of activity as volunteers scurried about, setting up booths, hanging colorful banners, and arranging chairs for the opening ceremony. Jake arrived early, his stomach a knot of nerves and excitement. He spotted Tyler helping to inflate balloons, the boy's enthusiasm infectious. As people began to filter into the park, Jake could feel the weight of expectation settling on his shoulders. This wasn't just an event, it was a statement, a first step towards healing the rift between the police and the community they served. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. The crowd grew steadily, a diverse mix of faces reflecting the true makeup of their town. Jake saw families with young children, elderly couples, teenagers in groups, and to his relief, a fair number of his fellow officers, some still looking uncertain, but present nonetheless. At precisely 10 a.m., Jake stepped up to the makeshift podium. The chatter of the crowd died down as all eyes turned to him. He cleared his throat, his hands gripping the edges of the podium. "Good morning, everyone," Jake began, his voice wavering slightly before steadying. "I want to thank you all for coming out today. This event, it means more than you might know." He paused, looking out over the sea of faces. Some were openly skeptical, others curious, and a few even encouraging. Jake took another deep breath and continued. "A few months ago, I made a mistake. A serious mistake that hurt not just one young man, but our entire community. I wrongfully detained Tyler Johnson, a 10-year-old boy who was doing nothing more than walking home." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Jake saw Tyler in the front row, giving him a small nod of encouragement. That incident opened my eyes to the deep divide that exists between law enforcement and the community we're sworn to protect and serve. It made me realize how much work we have to do, how much I have to do to rebuild trust and create real change. Jake's voice grew stronger as he spoke, fueled by the conviction in his words. This event today isn't about pretending everything is okay. It's not about sweeping our problems under the rug. It's about taking a first step together. It's about seeing each other as human beings, listening to each other's stories, and working together to create the kind of community we all want to live in. As Jake concluded his speech, there was a moment of silence. Then, from somewhere in the middle of the crowd, a slow clap started. It spread, growing in volume until the entire park was filled with applause. Jake felt a lump form in his throat, overwhelmed by the response. As he stepped down from the podium, Tyler bounded up to take his place. The young boy's presence immediately changed the energy in the crowd, his youthful optimism a stark contrast to the heavy topics just discussed. "Hi, everyone," Tyler said, his voice clear and confident. "I'm Tyler, and I'm really excited about today. When Officer Carter and I started working on that mural together, I learned something important. I learned that change is possible, but it takes all of us working together." Tyler's words, simple yet profound, seemed to touch something in the crowd. Jake watched as people nodded along, some wiping away tears. "Today isn't about forgetting the past," Tyler continued. "It's about creating a better future. So let's have some fun, make new friends, and start building the community we want to see." As Tyler finished, the crowd erupted in cheers. The event officially kicked off, with people dispersing to various activities around the park. Jake watched as children challenged officers to games of basketball, families worked side by side on a new community mural, and groups gathered for facilitated discussions on community policing. Throughout the day, Jake found himself engaged in countless conversations. Some were difficult, with community members expressing their fears and frustrations. Others were hopeful, focused on ideas for positive change. Each interaction left Jake with a deeper understanding of the community he served and a renewed commitment to doing better. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the park, Jake found himself standing next to Lisa, Tyler's mother. They watched as Tyler laughed with a group of kids, including some of the officers' children. "You know," Lisa said softly, "when Tyler first told me about this idea, I thought he was crazy. I was scared, angry, and didn't want anything to do with the police." Jake nodded, understanding her hesitation all too well. But watching him today, seeing how he refuses to let fear define him, "It's taught me something," Lisa continued. "Change is possible, but it takes courage. It takes people willing to take that first step, even when it's hard." Jake felt a lump form in his throat. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "For giving us, for giving me a chance." As the event wound down, Jake and Tyler found themselves back at the podium for a closing speech. This time, they stood side by side, a visual representation of the bridge they were trying to build. "Today was just the beginning," Jake said, looking out at the tired but happy faces of his neighbors and colleagues. "We have a long way to go, but I believe that together we can create the kind of community we all deserve." Tyler nodded enthusiastically. "And we're not going to stop here. This is just the first of many events, many conversations, many steps forward. Who's with us?" The crowd's response was a resounding cheer, a sound of hope and determination that echoed through the park and into the streets beyond. As Jake looked at Tyler, then out at the community they were both part of, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was what being a police officer was truly about. Not just enforcing laws, but building and being part of a community. And for the first time in a long time, he felt genuinely hopeful about the future. In the days following the community event, there was a palpable shift in the atmosphere of the town. The local newspaper ran a front-page story about the gathering, complete with photos of officers and residents working side by side on the community mural. Social media buzzed with positive comments and shared experiences from the day. It seemed that Jake and Tyler's efforts had struck a chord with many in the community. Jake found himself reinvigorated in his work, approaching his patrols with a new perspective. He made a point to engage more with the residents on his beat, taking time to chat with shop owners and play a quick game of catch with kids in the park. The small interactions, he realized, were the building blocks of trust. However, not everyone was pleased with the changes Jake was championing. One evening, as Jake was finishing up his shift paperwork, his phone rang. The caller ID showed an unknown number. "Officer Carter speaking," he answered. There was a moment of silence before a distorted voice spoke. "You think you're making things better, playing nice with those people? You're a traitor to the badge. Watch your back, Carter." The line went dead before Jake could respond. He sat there, phone still in hand, a cold feeling settling in his stomach. He had expected some resistance to his new approach, but this felt different. This felt dangerous. Jake debated whether to report the call. On one hand, it could be just an empty threat from someone resistant to change. On the other, if there was a real threat, it could put not just him, but also Tyler and others at risk. After a moment's hesitation, he decided to file a report, just to be safe. The next day, Jake couldn't shake the uneasy feeling as he went about his duties. He found himself scanning faces, wondering if the caller was someone he knew, someone he worked with. The thought was unsettling. As he was walking through the neighborhood where Tyler lived, he saw Lisa outside, tending to her garden. She waved him over, a concerned look on her face. "Jake, is everything okay?" she asked as he approached. "You look worried." Jake hesitated, not wanting to alarm her, but also feeling a need to be honest. "I received a threatening phone call last night," he admitted. "Someone's not happy with the changes we're trying to make." Lisa's eyes widened with concern. "Oh, Jake, are you going to be all right? Should we be worried about Tyler?" Jake shook his head firmly. "I've reported it, and I don't think there's any immediate danger. But I wanted you to be aware, just in case. Maybe keep an extra eye out for anything unusual." Lisa nodded, her face a mix of worry and determination. "We knew this wouldn't be easy," she said. "But we can't let fear stop us. Tyler believes in what we're doing, and so do I." As if summoned by the mention of his name, Tyler came bounding out of the house. His face lit up when he saw Jake. "Officer Carter, guess what? My teacher wants me to present our community project to the whole school." Jake felt a surge of pride, momentarily forgetting his worries. "That's fantastic, Tyler. You're going to do great." As Tyler excitedly shared his plans for the presentation, Jake couldn't help but marvel at the boy's resilience and optimism. Here was a kid who had every reason to be afraid, to be angry, yet he chose hope instead. Over the next few days, Jake noticed an increase in support from unexpected quarters. Residents would stop him on the street to thank him for his efforts. Some of his fellow officers, who had initially been skeptical, began to show interest in community engagement initiatives. One afternoon, as Jake was grabbing coffee at a local cafe, an elderly woman approached him. He recognized her as Mrs. Thompson, a regular attendee at community meetings. "Officer Carter," she said, her voice low but firm, "I want you to know that we see what you're doing, and we appreciate it. Don't let anyone tell you it doesn't matter." Jake felt a lump in his throat. "Thank you, Mrs. Thompson. That means a lot." As she walked away, Jake realized that for every voice of opposition, there were many more in support. The community was rallying around the changes, protecting the progress they had made together. That evening, as Jake patrolled the neighborhood, He noticed a group of teenagers gathered near the community mural. His first instinct was to be wary, but as he approached, he saw that they were adding their own contributions to the artwork, expanding on the themes of unity and understanding. One of the teens, a girl with vibrant blue hair, looked up as Jake approached. Instead of the usual wariness he often encountered from young people, she smiled. "Hey, Officer Carter, want to add something to the mural?" Jake felt a warmth spread through his chest. This, he realized, was what real change looked like. Not grand gestures or sweeping reforms, but small moments of connection and trust. As he picked up a paintbrush, Jake knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together as a community. The anonymous caller's threat echoed in the back of his mind, a reminder that the path forward wouldn't always be smooth. But looking at the faces of the teens around him, at the mural that symbolized their shared hopes, Jake felt ready to meet those challenges head-on. He may have started this journey to make amends for one mistake, but it had become something much bigger. It had become a movement, a collective effort to reshape the relationship between the police and the community. And no threat, no resistance, could stop the momentum of a community united in its desire for change. As Jake's efforts to bridge the gap between the police and the community gained momentum, not everyone was pleased with the changing dynamics. A small group of officers, led by the veteran Mike Dawson, viewed Jake's actions as a betrayal of their brotherhood. One evening, as Jake was leaving the station after his shift, he overheard a heated conversation in the locker room. He paused, recognizing Mike's voice. "Carter's gone soft," Mike was saying, his voice low and angry. "He's making us look weak. We need to do something about it." Another voice, which Jake identified as Officer Brian Thompson, chimed in. "What are you suggesting, Mike? We can't just ignore the chief's orders to support these community initiatives." Mike's response sent a chill down Jake's spine. "We don't ignore them. We show everyone why they're a bad idea. We create a situation that proves Carter's approach doesn't work." Jake's mind raced as he quietly slipped away. He knew Mike and his supporters were resistant to change, but he never imagined they'd go this far. He debated whether to report what he'd heard, but realized he had no concrete evidence of any planned wrongdoing. Over the next few days, Jake found himself constantly on edge, watching for any signs of sabotage. He doubled down on his community efforts, determined not to let fear derail the progress they'd made. During a routine patrol, Jake received a call about a disturbance at a local convenience store. As he arrived on the scene, he found Mike already there, handcuffing a young black man who was protesting his innocence. "What's going on here?" Jake asked, approaching cautiously. Mike looked up, a glint in his eye that made Jake uneasy. "Caught this guy shoplifting. Open and shut case." The young man, who Jake recognized as Marcus, one of Tyler's friends, was adamant. "I didn't take anything. He just came in and grabbed me." Jake's instincts told him something wasn't right. "Mike, let's review the security footage before we take this any further." Mike's face darkened. "Are you questioning my judgment, Carter? This is exactly the kind of soft approach that's going to get us all killed." As tensions escalated, Jake noticed a small crowd gathering, many with phones out, recording the interaction. He realized with a sinking feeling that this was exactly the kind of situation Mike had been hoping for. A chance to discredit the community policing efforts. Jake took a deep breath, centering himself. "Mike, I'm not questioning your judgment. I'm following procedure. We review the evidence before making an arrest. That's how we build trust with the community." Reluctantly, Mike released Marcus. The store owner, who had been watching the scene unfold, stepped forward. "I can show you the security footage," he offered. As they reviewed the tape, it became clear that Marcus had not stolen anything. He had simply been browsing when Mike entered the store and immediately confronted him. Jake turned to Mike, his voice low and controlled. "We need to talk about this back at the station." As they left the store, Jake apologized to Marcus and assured him that the incident would be thoroughly investigated. The crowd that had gathered murmured their approval, many nodding appreciatively at Jake's handling of the situation. Back at the station, Jake reported the incident to the chief, who looked grave as he listened to the account. "This is serious, Carter," the chief said. "If what you're saying is true, we're looking at a clear case of misconduct. I'll need to launch a full investigation." Jake nodded, feeling a mix of relief and apprehension. He knew this was necessary, but he also knew it would likely deepen the divide within the department. As he left the chief's office, Jake's phone buzzed with a text from Tyler. "Did you hear what happened with Marcus? People are talking about it all over social media." Jake sighed, realizing that the incident, while averted, had still made waves in the community. He texted back, asking Tyler to meet him at their usual spot near the mural. When Jake arrived, he found not just Tyler, but a small group of community members, including Lisa and Marcus. Their faces were a mix of concern and curiosity. "What really happened today?" Lisa asked, her voice tinged with worry. Jake took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "There was a misunderstanding at the store, but we're dealing with it internally, and I promise you, we're committed to making sure these kinds of incidents don't happen again." Marcus stepped forward, his eyes meeting Jake's. "I want to thank you," he said quietly, "for listening, for not just assuming I was guilty." Jake felt a lump in his throat. "That's my job, Marcus, to serve and protect everyone in this community. I'm just sorry you had to go through that." As the group discussed the incident, Jake was struck by their willingness to engage, to seek understanding rather than simply condemn. It was a testament to the trust they'd been building. Tyler, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke up. "So what do we do now? How do we make sure this doesn't happen again?" Jake looked at the earnest faces around him, feeling the weight of their trust and expectations. "We keep doing what we've been doing," he said firmly. "We keep talking, keep working together, and we hold each other accountable, community members and police officers alike." As the group nodded in agreement, Jake felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead would be challenging, with resistance from both within and outside the department. But looking at the faces of the people he'd sworn to serve and protect, Jake knew that the effort was worth it. The incident, while troubling, had also revealed the strength of the bonds they'd been building. It had shown that when faced with adversity, the community and the police could come together, could choose understanding over division. As the sun set behind them, casting long shadows across the mural that had started it all, Jake realized that this was just another step in their journey. A difficult one, but a necessary one. And together, they would keep moving forward. One conversation, one action, one day at a time. In the wake of the incident with Marcus, tension within the police department reached a fever pitch. Jake found himself increasingly isolated from many of his fellow officers, who viewed his actions as a betrayal. However, he also noticed a small but growing group of officers who seemed inspired by his approach, quietly expressing their support. Meanwhile, Tyler and Lisa had not been idle. Disturbed by what had happened to Marcus, they decided to take action. With the help of some tech-savvy friends from school, Tyler began gathering stories from community members about their interactions with the police, both positive and negative. One evening, as Jake was finishing his patrol, he received a text from Lisa, asking him to meet them at their house. Curious and a little apprehensive, Jake made his way there. When he arrived, he found Tyler, Lisa, and a small group of community members huddled around a laptop in the living room. Tyler's face lit up when he saw Jake. "Officer Carter, you've got to see this," he exclaimed, waving Jake over. As Jake approached, he saw a website displayed on the screen. The header read, "Our community, our stories." "We've been collecting people's experiences with the police," Tyler explained excitedly. "Both good and bad. We thought if we could show everyone the real impact of police actions, maybe it would help create more understanding. Jake scrolled through the site, his heart heavy as he read accounts of unfair treatment and racial profiling. But there were also stories of officers going above and beyond to help community members, of positive interactions that had changed perceptions. "This is powerful stuff, Tyler," Jake said, his voice thick with emotion. "But have you considered the potential backlash? Some officers might not take kindly to this kind of exposure." Lisa stepped forward, her face set with determination. "We've thought about that. But we can't let fear stop us from doing what's right. These stories need to be told." As they discussed the implications of the website, Jake's phone buzzed with a news alert. His stomach dropped as he read the headline. "Anonymous source leaks internal police emails, reveals department divide." Jake quickly scanned the article, his mind racing. The leaked emails included conversations between Mike and several other officers, discussing plans to undermine community policing efforts and put Carter in his place. The room fell silent as Jake shared the news. The implications were clear. The division within the department was now public knowledge, and the situation was about to get much more complicated. "What do we do now?" Tyler asked, his earlier excitement replaced by concern. Jake took a deep breath, trying to center himself. "We stick to the truth," he said firmly. "We continue our efforts to build bridges, and we don't let this divide us further." Over the next few days, the town was abuzz with the news of the leaked emails. Jake found himself at the center of a media storm, with reporters clamoring for comments and interviews. The police chief called an emergency meeting of all officers. The atmosphere in the room was tense as he addressed the force. "I won't sugarcoat this," the chief began, his face grave. "We're facing a crisis of trust, both within our department and with the community we serve. But this is also an opportunity to recommit ourselves to our true purpose, to protect and serve all members of our community." As the chief outlined plans for additional training and a thorough review of department policies, Jake noticed Mike and his supporters huddled in the corner, their faces dark with anger. After the meeting, Jake was approached by Sarah, a rookie officer he had mentored. "I just wanted you to know," she said quietly, "that a lot of us support what you're doing. We became cops to make a difference, not to perpetuate injustice." Jake felt a glimmer of hope at her words. Change was possible, even if it was difficult and slow. That evening, Jake met with Tyler, Lisa, and a group of community leaders to discuss their next steps. The mood was somber, but determined. "The website has been flooded with news stories since the news broke," Tyler reported. "People feel like they're finally being heard." Lisa nodded, adding, "But we're also seeing an increase in tension on the streets. People are angry, and they're looking for someone to blame." Jake listened intently, his mind working to find a way forward. "What if we used this moment to push for real, structural change?" he suggested. "We have the attention of the media and the public. Let's use it to advocate for concrete reforms in police training, accountability, and community engagement." The group discussed various ideas, from citizen review boards to enhanced de-escalation training for officers. As the conversation progressed, Jake felt a renewed sense of purpose. This crisis, as challenging as it was, could be the catalyst for meaningful change. As the meeting wound down, Tyler pulled Jake aside. "I'm scared," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "What if this makes things worse instead of better?" Jake knelt down to meet Tyler's eyes. "Change is always scary, buddy. But remember why we started this in the first place? To create a community where everyone feels safe and respected. We can't give up now." Tyler nodded, a small smile returning to his face. "You're right. We've come too far to stop now." As Jake left the meeting, he felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. The path ahead would be challenging, with resistance from within the department and skepticism from parts of the community. But he also felt a glimmer of hope. The truth was out in the open now, and with it came the opportunity for real, lasting change. He knew that the coming days and weeks would be crucial. How they responded to this crisis would determine the future of policing in their community. But looking back at the house, where Tyler, Lisa, and the others were still deep in discussion, Jake felt ready to face whatever came next. Together, they had started this journey, and together, they would see it through. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. The leaked emails had thrust the department's internal struggles into the spotlight, and the entire community was now engrossed in the unfolding drama. Jake found himself at the center of it all, a reluctant symbol of change in a department resistant to it. As the controversy raged, the police chief called for a town hall meeting to address the community's concerns directly. The local high school auditorium was packed to capacity, with tensions running high as residents, officers, and media outlets crowded into the space. Jake stood at the back of the room, his heart pounding as he surveyed the scene. He spotted Tyler and Lisa in the crowd, their faces a mix of determination and anxiety. Across the room, he saw Mike and his supporters, their expressions dark and confrontational. The chief took the stage, his face grave as he addressed the assembly. "Good evening, everyone. We're here tonight to address the serious issues that have come to light in recent weeks. I want to assure you all that we are committed to transparency and accountability in our department." As the chief spoke, outlining plans for reform and additional training, murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some voices were skeptical, others supportive. Jake could feel the weight of expectation in the room, the community's desire for real, tangible change. Suddenly, a voice cut through the chief's speech. "This is all just talk." It was Mike, standing up from his seat, his face flushed with anger. "Carter and his bleeding heart approach are putting officers' lives at risk. We can't do our jobs if we're constantly second-guessing ourselves." The room erupted into chaos, with shouts and arguments breaking out across the auditorium. Jake knew he had to act. Taking a deep breath, he made his way to the stage, gesturing to the chief for permission to speak. As Jake took the microphone, the room gradually fell silent, all eyes turning to him. He looked out at the sea of faces, his fellow officers, community members, people he'd sworn to protect and serve. "I became a police officer because I wanted to make a difference," Jake began, his voice steady despite his nerves. "To protect and serve." But somewhere along the way, we lost sight of what that really means. We forgot that to truly serve our community, we need to be part of it. We need to understand it. He paused, his eyes scanning the room. What happened with Tyler, with Marcus, with countless others? It's not okay, and it's on us, as officers, to do better. But we can't do it alone. We need your help, your understanding, your willingness to work with us. Jake turned to face his fellow officers. "And to my colleagues who think this approach is weak or dangerous, I challenge you to try it. To get to know the people in your beat, to listen to their stories, to see them as individuals, not just potential threats. It's not about being soft. It's about being smart, being effective, and truly serving our community." As Jake spoke, he could see the impact of his words. Some faces softened, others nodded in agreement. Even Mike, who had been so vocal in his opposition, seemed to be listening intently. "What we're doing here, it's not easy," Jake continued. "Change never is, but it's necessary, because at the end of the day, we're all part of this community, and we all want the same thing: to feel safe, to be treated with respect, to live without fear." Jake's voice grew stronger as he reached the end of his speech. "So I'm asking all of you, officers and community members alike, to commit to this change with me, to have the difficult conversations, to challenge our assumptions, to hold each other accountable, because that's how we build the kind of community we all want to live in. As Jake finished speaking, there was a moment of profound silence. Then, from somewhere in the middle of the crowd, a slow clap started. It spread, growing in volume until the entire auditorium was filled with applause. Jake stepped back, feeling drained but hopeful. He saw Tyler and Lisa beaming at him from the crowd, and even noticed a few of his fellow officers nodding in approval. As the applause died down, the chief retook the stage. "Thank you, Officer Carter," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I think you've given us all a lot to think about. And I want to announce right here, right now, that we will be implementing a new community policing initiative with Officer Carter at the helm." The announcement was met with another round of applause. Jake felt a mix of surprise and determination. He knew the road ahead would be challenging, but for the first time in weeks, he felt truly hopeful. As the meeting adjourned, people began to file out of the auditorium. Jake found himself surrounded by a mix of community members and fellow officers, all wanting to talk, to share ideas, to be part of the change. Mike approached Jake, his face unreadable. For a moment, Jake tensed, unsure of what to expect. Then Mike extended his hand. "I still don't agree with everything you're doing, Carter," he said gruffly. "But I respect your guts. Maybe there's something to this approach after all." Jake shook Mike's hand, feeling a glimmer of hope. It wasn't full support, but it was a start. As the crowd thinned, Jake found himself face to face with Tyler and Lisa. Tyler's eyes were shining with pride. "You did it, Officer Carter," he exclaimed. "You really did it." Jake smiled, ruffling Tyler's hair. "No, buddy, we did it. All of us together." Lisa nodded, her eyes misty. "This is just the beginning, isn't it?" "Yeah," Jake agreed, looking out at the dispersing crowd, at the mix of officers and community members talking animatedly. "But it's a pretty good beginning." As they left the auditorium together, Jake felt a renewed sense of purpose. The path ahead would be challenging, filled with obstacles and setbacks. But looking at Tyler's excited face, at the tentative hope in Lisa's eyes, at the community coming together in ways he had never seen before, Jake knew it would be worth it. This was what being a police officer was truly about. Not just enforcing laws, but building and being part of a community. And as they stepped out into the cool night air, Jake felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that they would face them together, as a united community.